So today we're going to be talking about samples and surveys. So first, we're going to look at, before we get our data, how do we get our sample, or different ways that we can get our sample so that we can run some kind of, like find the mean or find the average of our sample. So first off, our population is all members of a set. A sample, then, is part of the population. So, generally, we want to know information about our population, but our population is too large to just sample everything or to find out all of the information. So what we do is we take a sample to make an estimate about our population. So say we have a lake full of fish. And we want to know what is the average length of these fish. So what we can do is, instead of catching every single fish in the lake, we'll take a sample. We'll catch a random sample of 4 fish and use that to estimate the average fish length. So there are different ways we could sample, or different sampling techniques, to get an estimation about our population. So first off, a convenience sample is where we select any members of the population who are conveniently and readily available. Select any members of the population who are conveniently and readily available. So for example, if I was trying to find the average height of a, is it just high school student? If I took the students in my classroom, that would be a convenient sample and found their average heights, because you guys are right there. A self-selected sample is where we select only members of the population who volunteer for the sample. So we select only members of the population who volunteer to be part of the sample. So this could be, I post something on Twitter, a poll on Twitter, and I tell people, hey, go answer my poll. So only those people that actually go and answer those, they're only volunteering to answer. They're not made to do anything. A systematic sample is where we order the population in some way and then select from it in random intervals. So say I put everybody alphabetical and I choose every 3rd person. Or I order everybody by student number and then I choose every 10th person. There's some kind of system or method to how I'm choosing, and they are at regular intervals. So every 10th person, every 2nd person, every 5th person. That's what makes it systematic. And then a random sample means that all members of the population are equally likely to be chosen. Sometimes we'll also call this a simple random sample, or an SRS. So this would be using our number table, a spinner, a die, flipping a coin, putting everybody's name into a pot and then pulling them out. Okay? Simple random sample, or a random sample. There are different types of random samples besides a simple random sample. We're not going to go into it in this course, but there are things like a stratified random sample or a cluster random sample, just different ways that we can get our samples. So samples vary in how well they reflect a population. So sometimes when we have a population, ideally, we want our sample to be a smaller version of our population. So sometimes, depending on our sampling method, our sample will not look like our population. And different samples could look different ways. But in an ideal scenario, our sample is a mini version of our population. So diagram, sometimes our sample is a square, sometimes it's a triangle. We want our sample to be like a little cloud, like our population was a cloud. So we say a sample has bias when part of the population is over or underestimated. And a bias, we would define, is a systematic error that's been introduced by the sampling method. So when we take our sample, we took a bad sample, we did something wrong, and not necessarily something wrong, but our sample, there was an error with it, and it doesn't look like our population anymore. All right, so problem 1. A newspaper wants to find out what percent of the city's population favors a property tax increase to raise money for local parks. What is the sampling method used for each situation? Does the sample have bias? Explain. I think I labeled them A, B, C, and they just didn't show up. So A, newspaper article on tax increase invites readers to express their opinion on the newspaper's website. So we are identifying the sampling method and if it has any bias. So A, the sampling method is self-selected because they are volunteering to answer these questions. And then does it have bias? I would encourage you to write on the side. I don't really have room, so I'll just write on the bottom. So I would say it might have bias depending on who replies. So there may be people who respond may overrepresent or underrepresent the population. So in general, if you are going out of your way to go on this newspaper's website and answer these questions, you feel very strongly about tax increase. Okay, generally people who don't have an opinion or don't have a strong opinion one way or the other don't generally go and voice their opinion. So you either are very for or very against this tax increase. Kind of think of it like a Yelp review or a Google review. Only people who have people who have really good experiences or really bad experiences go and answer it or go and fill out a review. So B, a reporter interviews people leaving the city's largest park. Well, this is a convenience sample. Because it's convenient for the reporter to stay in one place. You just have to stay in one place and ask people. So would there be bias? Well, they're leaving the largest park. And we're talking about a tax increase for parks. So they may be overrepresented of park supporters. So because the location is near a park, the sample may overrepresent park supporters, and the result will have a bias. All right, and then C, a service calls every 50th listing from a local phone book. So this is clearly a systematic sample. They're listing off every 50th person in the phone book. And then would it have bias? So there may have bias if there's some linking between people who are listed and not listed in the phone book and property taxes. It's less likely this way that there's bias. All right, so go ahead and try the U-try. Again, you're identifying the sampling method and whether it has bias. So go ahead and pause the video and try the U-try. So this is a convenience sample. Is there bias? Yes, there's probably bias because we're talking about eating habits at a food court. So since our location is a food court, the sample may overrepresent fast food supporters. So that's how we get our sample. Our study methods are what we do with our sample. Okay, it's how we collect our information about our sample. So we could have an observational study. So we just measure or observe members in the sample in a way that they're not affected by the study. We can do a controlled experiment. Generally, we divide it into two groups. We impose a treatment on one group and not on the other group. Then we compare the effects of the treatment group to the control group. And then a survey is where we ask every member of the sample a set of questions. So I'd like you to take a minute, read these over again. All right, problem 2. We're going to identify the study method that's described in each situation. And should the sample statistic that we get used to make a general conclusion? So say we find, go back to our fish example from the beginning. Our fish length was an average of 7 inches. Does that mean we can say that the fish in the lake are on average 7 inches? And that really determines on how you collected your information. So A, researchers randomly choose 2 groups from 10 volunteers. Over a period of 8 weeks, one group eats ice cream before going to sleep and the other does not. Volunteers wear monitoring devices while sleeping, and researchers record dream activity. So first off, this is a controlled experiment. So can we make a general conclusion? We are only looking at 10 volunteers, so 5 in one group and 5 in the other. So because we have such a small sample size, that the findings are generally unreliable for a general conclusion. So B, students in a science class record the height of bean plants as they grow. So this would be an observational study. So we're just looking at the bean plants and recording how much they grow. So can these be used to make a general conclusion? So they may be used to make a conclusion about the growth rate. However, we are lacking information about things like soil, sunlight, water, etc., that can also be used or can affect growth rate. And then C, student council members ask every 10th student in the lunch line if they like cafeteria food. So this is a survey because we're just asking a question. And this is probably not reliable. Because we're only asking the people who are in the lunch line. Not the people that brought their lunch. So generally, if you're getting school lunch, you probably like school lunch more. And if you're bringing your lunch from home, you don't like school lunch. So if you're only asking the people that are in line, you're more likely to get a more positive result. So during the 2008 Olympic Games, a U.S. swimmer won more medals than any other swimmer in history. What sampling method could you use to find the percent of students in your school who recognize that swimmer from a photograph? What is an example of a survey question that is likely to yield information that has no bias? So what sampling method could we do? Lots of different ones. We could ask every 10th student entering the school. This would be a systematic sample. There could be different results. You can do this in a different way. And a question that probably contains the least bias, so our possible question that we could use, could just be who is pictured in this photograph. So how we ask a question can influence the results. So if I had talked about this swimmer is the most famous swimmer in history, do you know who this swimmer is? Or you're kind of like, oh, well, he's super famous, I should know who he is. Or if I'm talking about the tax increase for the parks. If I talked about our parks are some of the most underfunded and most used resources in our county, the recent survey says that most people want to increase their funding. Do you agree with this statement or disagree? So how you ask a question. Kind of think about those commercials. like with the puppy dogs on TV, and it's like this sad music that they play, and they're like asking for money. So they're kind of influencing your decision. All right, and that's all I got for today.